edition of World Crisis Radio. Welcome to our worldwide audience. And this is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C., the banks of the Potomac, now enveloped in beautiful autumn weather. It is the golden October, but we're not far from the first frost, according to some indications. And, of course, the scene is now gripped by the coming congressional elections. And these are now promising. There is ground for cautious optimism when it comes to turning out, or at least beginning to turn out, the one-party state. Americans are sick of one-party Republican rule. It is, of course, the rule of the mega donors, the multi-billionaires. And these were supposed to be the outsiders. Well, of course, they're nothing of the kind. It is the masked rule of the financiers, but wrapped up in this disgusting husk of irrationalism and brutality, violence, hatred, resentment, and so forth. We're told by Newt Gingrich, remember the word about him was, if you could tie Bob Dole to Newt Gingrich, that was the end of Dole, right? Dole Gingrich, make it all into one word, and so it was. He was overthrown by a coup of his own crazed followers. He's now on television saying that the Republican watchwords for this coming election will be Kavanaugh and the caravan. Can you imagine this? After 2 years of total power, total domination of all three branches, what they have to offer you is Kavanaugh and the caravan. The caravan, for those who are not hip, is a parade of 4,000 destitute and desperate individuals who are literally trying to walk across Mexico, principally from Honduras, so that they can come into the United States. They want to apply for political asylum. And in my opinion, according to the law, they have a very strong case. And remember, on the one hand, the United States must have good relations with everybody in the Caribbean and in Central America and in much of Latin America. That includes Venezuela. That includes Cuba. You want to have good relations with all of them, with Nicaragua. This is your backyard. This is where any adversary is going to try to create problems. And then, of course, we're told that there are 7 million jobs here in the U.S. which cannot be filled because there's no trained manpower. Well, if you get manpower, you can train them. And since Central America is an integral part of the Western world, it is a place where Spanish, it's an Indo-European, Latin-based language is spoken, and most of these people are at least nominally Roman Catholic. There should be a very easy assimilation of these people, especially the younger ones, but not in the minds of these raving irrationalists, right? All they can offer is demonization. The demonization of everything under the sun by the Republican Party, whining as they go, right? We've just had Congressman Bratt of Virginia, an extreme reactionary, a libertarian. He was the poster boy of the 2014 rebellion of the Tea Party and proto-Trumpers. He told a group of prisoners, many of them drug addicts, sitting in jail, that his life was actually harder than theirs because he was facing $5 million worth of Democratic Party negative ads about him and his malfeasance and his nonfeasance. So you want to have total power and be a victim at the same time, because you cannot be a responsible party of government because you don't represent government or the people. So this is where we are. The recourse to extreme irrationalism. And once again, it's fear, it's hatred, it's resentment. It's any combination of those. Anything that can be used to demonize the opposition. So the caravan, it looks like as of right now, the caravan has been stopped cold. God, the way Trump talks about this stuff, you'd think it was an armored spearhead of the Red Army or some kind of futuristic combat group of the People's Liberation Army. Or maybe Spectre is attacking with their zombie legions, or clones are attacking. These are defenseless, unfortunate people. And according to U.S. law, they have a very strong case for political asylum. Their lives are in danger from drug cartels and other factors. But that's not going to stop Trump. Now, the thing that you've also got to be aware of, the stakes in this election are extremely high. We remember in 2016, Trump paraded himself as a new kind of Republican. Oh, yes, a new kind of Republican. The kind who would not pursue genocidal austerity, killer cuts against the American people. But that's all out the window. That has not survived Trump's collusion with the pre-existing Republican establishment. Right? The conventional wisdom here in Washington is that Trump has absorbed the existing Republican establishment, right? The Mitch McConnells, the Ryans, and so forth. But you can also make a very good case that that establishment on many, many points has absorbed him. He is now their creature, certainly just as much as he can be seen, as they can be seen as his. So Mitch McConnell, at least twice this week on Tuesday and Wednesday, has declared his unshakable desire, first of all, to cut the basic social safety net left over from the New Deal and the Great Society, and also from the New Frontier. That would be Social Security pensions, old age and disability, Medicare, people over 65 right now, could be expanded, should be, and Medicaid, which is this component, which is the lower income part, and that is a key part of Obamacare. We should remind ourselves that Medicaid is also how the middle class is able to survive without being destitute themselves if an elderly relative has to go into a nursing home. This is what Medicaid can pay for. The Republicans wish to attack because of their discredited, scandalous, outrageous tax scam, tax cuts for the rich, trickle-down economics, supply side, all the old discredited cliches. Remember, Reagan tripled the national debt. He hit a triple. And George H.W. Bush did a pretty good job, too. I think George Bush, the younger, doubled the national debt that he found. So this explains now why under Trump and with these same Republicans who have been there for these decades, you've now got this colossal growth in the U.S. budget deficit. And the problem is, if it's spending on defense, that's one thing. You're going to get something for that. But most of this spending, you get nothing. The public gets nothing. It goes into the pockets of parasites and predators. And we'll be back here in just a second on World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley, Ph.D., speaking to you from the sunny and pleasant banks of the Potomac. And we're just about 2 weeks away from this vital election. And we are calling for persons of goodwill to understand the gravity of this situation. If the United States goes under a consolidated fascist dictatorship, that will put world civilization in an unprecedented situation, unprecedented danger, and it's better, therefore, to do the obvious, which is don't worry about personalities or candidates. Vote the straight Democratic Party ticket. That's what you've got to do. So you don't need to do much homework, right? You might say, okay, we can concede that for county executive or library board or school board or something, you might want a Republican. But how would you? How would you? You're going to get a disciple of DeVos who's going to get on the school board and destroy the schools. You're going to get somebody on the library board who thinks that libraries are a communist invention or some other benighted, barbaric savagery. So it's really going to have to be the straight Republican ticket. In New York City, I can recall, New York State, there was a lever you could pull. You could go through and do these little levers for each name, or you could just pull a lever, and it was, pow, the straight Democratic ticket, and all the little levers lined up. So if you can do that, do it. Few of those voting machines left, but some are. And that's what you have to do. Vote these bums out. We're amazed by the cynical nihilism of Mitch McConnell, who tells you what he's doing. We just went through. He says he wants to cut the social safety net. With that, he is trampling on the promises Trump made. Trump was a different kind of Republican. Trump said he didn't want people dying in the streets. Mitch McConnell doesn't care if people die in the streets. And therefore, he wants to trample these three components. And then, not happy with that alone, Mitch McConnell then went on the following day in another interview. I think he did Bloomberg and then Reuters or something like this. He then went on to specify that Obamacare must also be destroyed. They're not happy with it. And here, of course, the hypocrisy of the Republicans is overwhelming. Trump said he doesn't want to attack the well-established three, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. But, of course, Trump is committed to destroying the Affordable Care Act of 2011-2012. The average Republican is now simply lying to the voters. You've got to be a moron. You've got to be an imbecile to accept what the Republicans are saying. The Republicans say, oh, yeah, we're going to keep the ban on pre-existing conditions. You'll be able to get insurance no matter what pre-existing condition you have, and it will be reasonable, and they won't be able to cut you off. We have the scoundrel of Wisconsin, that is to say Governor Scott Walker, the union buster, and he was the target of a mass strike back in 2011. It was the same time as the Arab Spring. They tried to get rid of him. Unfortunately, the weaklings of the Democratic Party got in the way, and Scott Walker was able to hold on because the candidate that the Democrats put up, the mayor of Milwaukee, turned out to be a weakling. He turned out to be of useless qualities. He's on TV now saying, as long as I'm governor, you can be sure that we will keep the ban on pre-existing conditions. And it's simply a lie. Mitch McConnell is warmly in favor of a lawsuit, and Trump is equally in favor, warmly, hotly in favor of a lawsuit which has been brought by the Attorney General of Texas, an arch-reactionary, needless to say, Republican. And the goal of this is to destroy Obamacare through the courts. Their chances have gotten much better now that we have the dipsomaniac on the Supreme Court. That would be Kavanaugh, right? The beer-drinking justice, beer-loving. The Romans used to say, in vino veritas. Kavanaugh says, no, no, no. In cerevisia veritas. In other words, in beer there is truth. Not truth in wine, but truth in beer. We are hoping, certainly, that more compromising information, more withheld documents, more of his victims will come forward. But in the meantime, he is there, and he is a vote for dictatorship. In the case of Trump, he's a vote for killer austerity, and essentially to trample on the rights of anybody who's not a super rich mega billionaire donor. So those were the issues, and of course the fact that he's a Bluebeard, that he's a somebody who mistreats women. This is also a part of it. So Mitch is on the attack, but with this cynical nihilism. I'm telling you what he's doing. In other words, he's basically saying, I believe you schmucks are so stupid and so benighted and so stupefied and so much the playthings of rage, hate, resentment, and this vicarious living. You're so devoted to living your lives as if you were the ersatz Donald Trump, that Donald Trump's successes are yours and his defeats are going to be yours, and that's all you care about. In other words, you've given up completely on your own life. That seems to be where we're at for some of these people. But remember, we're going to get to this also later, they say that the Republican base has been energized by the Kavanaugh business, and it's possible. But who's the Republican base? Above all, how many of them are there? The Republican Party is now down to 24% of registered voters, according to some statistics that we've looked at. You also have to remember that even though most of these people are fanatics for Trump, they're loony birds, bats out of hell to support Don. Suppose Trump has 90% of the Republican Party. That means that's even less. That gets you down closer to 20%. So you can have 20% of berserkers, and that won't be enough. It won't be enough. Democrats in the mid-30s, and the rest are independent. Horrified by this. Back to the radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we want to remind you, in these very troubled times and in this highly charged political environment, fast-moving and hectic, with many a surprise at odd hours, it's not enough just to tune in to this program here, but you've got to get the lowdown every day. You can do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at The American System. And to do that, you've got to go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and join the ranks of those who actually know what's going on. In other words, the act of loudly stating what is actually happening has, by some philosophers and commentators, pointed out that's a revolutionary action in itself. So just knowing the truth about what's happening is of tremendous value. That's what we try to do. So go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and you'll get the background, things that we in some ways try to summarize here, or we try to give you the apexes of the analysis, but there's a lot of detail that you have to know. All right. So Mitch McConnell has made clear that the real program of the Republican Party, destroy the social safety net left over from the New Deal and the Great Society, New Frontier, and also attack the one recent addition, which would be Obamacare. And I get the idea that Mitch would also like to destroy the Medicare Part D, that is the prescription drug benefit established by George W. Bush. Even that, much communism for Mitch. Therefore, remember this famous study, Harvard study and some other, that if they simply wiped out Obamacare and you didn't have anything, this leads to 40,000 to 50,000 needless deaths, concrete human beings, Americans mostly, who will perish. They'll die if this Republican plan goes through. So the politics of life and death is always it's always one of the most basic forms of political activity, awareness, and so forth. So you got to understand these are the stakes. If you want to live, if you have a family, a wife, children, if you have brothers or sisters, if you have aged parents, and so forth, you have got to do everything you can to defeat this Republican Party, because they will literally leave you nothing but your eyes to cry with. Now, some of this stuff has been obscured. We have to stress again, and I think we're the only ones talking about this. I haven't seen anybody else bring it up. There is a sharp right turn by the controlled corporate media. We have an idea why they're doing it. They like the Republican tax scam. They want that money. Their corporate tax rate, in theory, they didn't pay it, but in theory, 35%, now it's down to 21%. They don't want that to go back up to 25, 26, 27%, which would still be a great windfall for these people. And I think what you're seeing is the fact that the only thing these guys can think of doing is to do stock buybacks and other insider tricks, shows that they have forfeited the moral right to get those tax cuts. So watch out for the mass media. Don't be demoralized. Don't get confused. The Republicans are only in the demonization business. Who's it going to be? MS-13. Yeah, tried, not so good. Hillary Rodham Clinton. Well, unfortunately, she's giving them another go by her multi-city tour with old Bill. Very unwise, right? She really ought to think about what she's doing to the cause, if she believes it. I guess for them, the cause is themselves. Demonize Mueller. How about, of course, Strzok and Page and Comey and the rest of them. Demonize the FBI, demonize the Federal Reserve, demonize Jerome Powell. Right now, the Republican slogan is jobs, not mobs. But what they're mounting looks to me like a mob. In other words, a crowd of angry pitchforks screaming, lock her up. Or Trump getting up there and saying, oh, I admire Congressman John Forte of Montana so much because he physically assaulted, body slammed a reporter. That's the kind of thing we need. So this is hooliganism. The hooligan president, his hooligan party, and his hooligan candidates. And it's sort of the techniques of wrestling, right? Wasn't Trump once an executive of this wrestling federation? He's got that woman at the Small Business Administration who comes from the wrestling world, right? The stables of groaners, as they were called, right? Going back to Gorgeous George, I'm sure. Trump undoubtedly admired Gorgeous George. That may be one of his unsung inspirations. But they're the ones who are inspiring a lot of these methods, right? This sort of tough talk. It's like what one professional wrestler would yell at the other when they get into the ring. All right. Now, we want to pay attention. First of all, as I say, we've got to be aware what's going on here with this austerity plan. And we'll be talking about this all the way in. But this is really what they want to do. On the surface, then they say, well, it's going to be jobs, not mobs. Well, we have that covered too. In terms of actual jobs, let's try to refute this here with some historical information. We know, for example, first of all, that Trump is an inferior job creating president, his rate of job creation, which he touts as being without historical precedent, is simply inferior to Obama. And we've had a number of people on CNBC, right, which is something to watch these days because of the stock market crash, that clearly there are at least some people in the business world who are not completely cretinized by Trump's circus. And they point out, right, that Obama is 20, 30, 40,000 jobs ahead of Trump in terms of job creation. So it's a big fraud. And let's see if we can say a few more words. Here's the other example, right? Jobs, not mobs. Well, we've tried to show they're the mob, right? The Republicans, the hooligan party, the Russian party. That's them. But job growth. Okay, this is now statistics from the Joint Economic Committee. Oh, it's from the Democratic staff. But it's based on statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Labor Department, okay? So what do we find? That if we take the recent year's average of the Republican presidents versus the Democratic presidents, you will see that if we look at Bush the Elder, Reagan, Nixon, Ford, Eisenhower, and Bush the Younger, you will see that their average job creation is 1%. And that includes Bush the Younger, who was actually negative. He never created a single job. Reagan did best with 2.3%, but of course, if you're going to triple the national debt, you should have something for it. The Democratic average is 2.5%. So all those presidents, Democrats 2.5% growth in jobs, Republicans 1%. Democrats win. Trump is a liar. Back in a minute. World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. If Trump is losing and the Republicans are losing overwhelmingly in job creation, right, it's not even close. It's 2.5% to a wretched 1% in job growth over all these years. What about GDP, right? Trump was touting, unprecedented 4% GDP. Well, again, one quarter does not a historical record make. And therefore, let's look at a couple of important comparisons here. If we look at this, the GDP, then we find that the average rate for Republican presidents over all these years, right, since actually Truman, now this goes back to Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, then Carter, then Reagan, then Bush the Elder, Clinton, Bush the Younger, Obama. And Trump does not raise this. If anything, he lowers it. He's not included in this data series. The average GDP growth under Republican presidents, 2.5% per year. Democratic presidents, 3.9, almost 4. How about that? Obama was 2 compared to Bush, 1.6. Clinton was 3.7 compared to Bush the Elder at 2. And Reagan at 3.4. So Clinton beats Reagan. And again, you can go through all this stuff. Now, the average MAGA hat-supporting fanatic who's living vicariously, he said, no, these are all lies. These have all been concocted by God knows what. Is it QAnon? No, QAnon is supposed to be the one who warns you against it. So you can do job creation, you can do GDP. This whole thing with we are the party of jobs, not mobs, it's wrong on both ends. It's a lie on both ends. You are the party of mobs. I'd like to punch him in the face, carry him out on a stretcher. How about Charlottesville? A fascist mob killing an American citizen in a university town. That looks like a mob to me. And, of course, on the job front, we've just said, even in the narrow focus, Trump is inferior to Obama. So their slogan is baloney. The caravan has been stopped at the Mexican border. We will get to Kavanaugh. We have some interesting studies, some statistics that Kavanaugh, maybe we ought to do this right now. Kavanaugh has not helped the Republicans. The Kavanaugh bounce is largely a chimera. It's largely hype. What could you expect? A government run by a hyping hooligan is going to essentially conform to that. So the Republicans have used this as a kind of public relations line. It's an analysis that they repeat, but as Mother said, saying does not make it so. And in this case, it's also not true. And we'll get to the hollowness of the Kavanaugh bounce in just a minute. Now, concerning economics, right now, it's one of those moments again. On Friday afternoon, a lot of the brokers leave town. They set everything up on a kind of a program or programmatic trading. The guy from Goldman Sachs was on TV. My dear friend, it's program trading, not programmatic trading. You don't have programmatic trading. All you have is these algorithms. So these guys head for the Hamptons. Is there a chance for one more weekend? Maybe it's the Adirondacks already. But right now, the Dow Jones is up 123 points here at the end of the day. We'll check this again, but we're close. Has it shifted at all? No, it's 109 points. So it's up a lousy 0.4% on the day. The S&P 500, which we have been following, sits currently, before the close, at 273.18. You will remember that we've been watching very carefully the 200-day moving average on the S&P, and in particular, that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2768 or thereabouts. So it means that the S&P 500 is sitting just above, a tiny bit above. It's sitting on the 200-day moving average, and the slightest sell order would be enough to precipitate it into this territory of giving a strong technical sell signal. Now, we usually don't pay attention to this stuff, right? Maybe you're surprised. But in the course of this week, we have had a very rough time financially. If you're not in the United States, this may not be obvious, but let's just mention a couple of points. If we look at this world now, in this world of speculation and so forth, what you're going to see is that the Dow Transportation Average is now in correction territory. It's down more than 10% since the highs at the end of September and beginning of October. So the so-called trannies, the Dow Transportation Average down more than 10% in correction territory. The Russell 2000, small cap companies, small capital, smaller companies, that is below 10%. That's in correction territory. And then the technology index, the NASDAQ, of their top 100, right, the one subset of this, the NASDAQ 100, the biggest, and there's a lot of the very big ones, right? A lot of the FANG are in there, right? The tech companies that have been leading the market. 74% of the top 100 are also in correction territory. So that doesn't look so good for this kind of a market, does it? And therefore, this represents grave technical damage done to the market. Why is this important? Because if you look at Trump's profile, the only plausible argument that he has in his favor is that he has been able to continue the stock market bubble begun under Obama. It was begun under, well, I guess it was begun under Bernanke with Obama, I think, and then it was carried on by Yellen under Obama, and then carried on by Powell, except now things have gotten dangerous, right? The bear sentiment is increasing. The bull market hysteria, the bubble economy, the dreams of effortless gains, this is all out the window, and you're now in this period of retrenchment, most likely, possible crisis for this stuff, and this is the big thing. It's the biggest wild card for the November election. And remember, we're not wishing ill on anybody, but when there's a bubble with the kind of government and stock mavens we have, right, with the finance oligarchs that we have and Wall Street being what it is, the only way to end a bubble, the only way a bubble ends, it's not like anybody has to do it, the bubble will collapse. So the argument here is, if the bubble's going to collapse anyway, why not let the voters be aware of it so that when they vote, they won't be voting based on dreams and lies from Trump, but they'll be based on something that is more like reality, and that would mean a correction. We'll be back here in just a minute for our second hour on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley, Ph.D., speaking to you from the banks of the Potomac here in the nation's capital. Nice sunny afternoon here. But now, 4 o'clock has just passed, right? We record on Friday afternoon. So right now it's Friday the 19th of October, 2018, and 4 o'clock has just sounded. And we're now looking at the close of the New York stock markets. And the most interesting thing is that Standard & Poor's 500, that SPX, the ticker symbol, or S&P 500, right? This is really the typical cross-section of a number of larger stocks, and we have been calling attention to the severe technical damage done to this index just in the last 10 days or so, 2 weeks at the very most. And this has continued. So here is now the headline, and I think it's quite a headline. It looks like something minute. It looks like something almost minuscule, but this is it. Right now, according to CNBC, and I'm comparing this with some others, but CNBC Markets is showing that the S&P 500, the SPX, closed at 2767.78. And write that down. 2767.78 is the current level. This index was down 1 point today, 0.004%, translating it to 1 point on this index. And the problem with that for them, for Trump, and for his whole gang, and for all of the finance oligarchs, is that this is now below the critical support level of the 200-day moving average. So the 200-day moving average, 2768.27, and it looks like it's this is about half a point below the current the 200-day moving average. So in other words, the S&P 500 has broken below the 200-day moving average. It is an ominous sign. Now, some chartists might say, well, that's not authoritative. That's not enough of a gap. Well, it is ominous. This is where you'd rather be safe than sorry. So let me just repeat this. The 200-day moving average, 2768.27, and the current level reported on CNBC Markets, 2767.78, which is about half a point lower. And that means an important technical level has yielded. This is ominous. And I would take a little census of the various sources telling you about things and whether they are telling you the whole truth or whether they're trying to lull you into some kind of a fool's paradise, make you into a Pollyanna. Other than this, what the CNBC and others are hyping is the Dow Jones, this very narrow 30-stock index. This was able to eke out a 0.25% gain today. That it's up about 65 points, and these points are much devalued by the fact that the market is now closing at 25,444.34. It's not in such good shape, but this is the first time after 3 weeks of losing, the Dow has now closed a little bit up, and part of this is due to Procter and Gamble, right? Toothpaste and so forth, and soap and what have you. This had a good earnings report, so this went up. The Russell 2000 down 1.15%. The VIX at just a little bit under 20. The NASDAQ lost 0.5% on the day. But the big headline, the S&P 500 SPX index has dipped below, however slightly, below the 200-day moving average. And if you tell that to an experienced chartist, they will probably get some attention out of that. So it means that if you decided to stay long over the weekend, maybe it's time to reconsider that, because this is a time of great dislocations. But we're going to do the dislocations here in just a minute. Let's just record why the Kavanaugh effect is a fraud. The Kavanaugh effect is a big chimera, does not exist. Now here's a reactionary publication, the Washington Examiner. Used to be you could get it for free in the subway on paper, but no more. And the writer here, Paul Bedard, has been around the Washington Times, other reactionary. The guy's he's got reactionary credentials. This is the point. Reactionary paper or website by now. Reactionary website, reactionary writer. So what do we find? Kavanaugh vote not helping key Republicans. And this is some Vox Populi polling. This is, I think, not exactly open, right? Sort of semi-private, whatever it is. All right, let's try 3 key states, right? These are the states that the Republicans are hoping for, right? States that have been voting reactionary in the recent past, and these reactionary states have Democratic senators. The states went for Trump. So what's going to happen to these senators? Nevada, Indiana, West Virginia. Okay, Indiana. They find that Senator Joe Donnelly has gained. He voted against Kavanaugh, and he has gained. He is now leading over his opponent, Republican Mike Brown, B-R-A-U-N, 55-45. And 35% of voters said the fact that Donnelly voted for Kavanaugh, the fact that he voted against him, what are we saying? This article has got a typo. That this vote, and 35% say the fact that he voted against Kavanaugh is going to make them more likely to vote for Donnelly. Yes, of course. A lot of these are Democrats, right? And they quote Democrats. 2/3 of Democrats say the fact that Donnelly voted no to Kavanaugh, the drunk, no to Kavanaugh, this makes those voters, 2/3 of Democrats, more likely to vote for Senator Donnelly. 1/3 of independents say that Donnelly's no vote makes them more likely to vote for him. So this is very bad news for the reactionary Republicans. Now let's go out to a different place. But before we leave Indiana, right? Indiana is a touchstone. This is not just any state. You remember Mayor Daley of Chicago used to go to the Democratic convention, and he'd tell you which state primaries were important. One year he said, Ohio is what counts. Well, I think we could say, political sensitivity of Indiana, and we'll be back to Indiana here in a minute before the show is over. The land of Pence. What happens if they keep a Democratic senator? That's going to be very embarrassing. So this is not just any old state. Nevada. Okay. Congresswoman Jackie Rosen is fighting against Senator Dean Heller, the most endangered. Rosen is leading Heller 51% to 49%. But there's no gain for Heller because he voted for the discredited Kavanaugh. There has been no Kavanaugh bump. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, don't lose sight of the fact that the S&P 500 SPX has closed below the 200-day moving average, according to my calculations, and this is an ominous sign for the chartists and the technicians. So, in Nevada, we find that Senator Heller, the most endangered, according to some accounts, he got nothing out of voting for Kavanaugh. It's a 50-50 split. Nevada voters evenly split on the impact of Heller's vote on who they're going to vote for. It's still a tie. Some voters were galvanized, but just as many were horrified. So, in West Virginia, Haunted Mansion, Senator Joe Manchin, ever the survivor, he's fighting the Republican Patrick Morrisey. Manchin has a lead. He's 53% to 47%. And this is not what he hoped for. 51% say supporting Kavanaugh, right, this ill-advised vote, treacherous vote, really, by Manchin, won't get them to vote one way or the other. He's only gotten about a quarter of the voters to say that they approve of his vote to support Kavanaugh. So he has a slim majority. Now, we want Haunted Mansion to win. If you're in West Virginia, go and vote for Haunted Mansion. In line with our general strategic directive, vote the straight Democratic ticket, for God's sake. For the love of Mike, for the love of Pete, for God's sake, vote the straight Democratic ticket. So the various factors of crisis. Now, we ought to say a few words about this, right? Some other things going on economically before we leave this question of the stock market. Housing. We've just had housing starts, right? We've had housing construction, the worst level since 2015, the worst level since Obama. So Trump doing worse than Obama in housing. Sears, bankrupt. You ought to take a look. We talked about this in our daily program about the role of hedge funds. Take a look at this. This is an article in CNN Business by Paul LaMonica. And Paul LaMonica writes that Sears was destroyed by hedge funds, and hedge funds and private capital have destroyed many other retailers. Sears was owned by Eddie Lampert, and his ESL investment firm. They bought a controlling stake in Kmart in 2003. They have run these companies into the ground. What the hedge funds do, they extract value. They squeeze them. They asset strip them. They use them as cash cows. They do not reinvest. These are predatory operations. We have a long-standing suggestion that hedge funds should be outlawed. NICS, hedge funds. And, of course, some other things that are going on right now. Toys R Us. We've reported this in the recent past, right? Toys R Us went down because of Bain Capital. Remember Romney? When Mitt Romney comes to town, the economy is gonna go south because you're gonna be essentially asset stripped, right? Break it up and put it on the market. Toys R Us was owned by Kohlberg Kravis Roberts. That was the original monstrosity of junk bond assisted hostile takeovers, barbarians at the gates back in the late 1980s. Attacked RJR Nabisco, all kinds of things. Bain Capital, Romney, and Vornado Realty Trust. That's what drove Toys R Us into the ground. By the way, the producers, Hasbro Toys, say that they're going to cut a bunch of jobs. They're saying not more than 10%. Not more than 10% of their jobs. Does Don factor that into his boasting and his statistics? No. And, of course, Sears by itself, that's about 75,000 jobs. That's more than the whole coal industry. But, of course, those jobs don't count for some mysterious reason. Now, of course, there is a difference between mining and retail, but we don't want to throw anything overboard in this terrible situation. Payless Shoe Source, that was done by Bloom Capital, Golden Gate Capital of San Francisco, equity firms. 700 stores closed. Radio Shack, owned by the hedge fund Standard General, bankrupt twice. Blackstone, BX, owns Fairway, the supermarket chain, bankrupt in 2016. We've got The Limited, Wet Seal, Claire's, Aeropostale, bankrupt at the hands of private equity and or hedge funds. Sports Authority, this is the private equity Leonard Green and Partners, shut down in 2016, 15,000 jobs. According to the Rise Up Retail Worker Advocacy Group, hedge funds are systematically destroying jobs across the nation. From Toys R Us to Sears, these financial predators are extracting value out of the retail establishments, forcing the closure of thousands of stores, throwing tens of thousands of workers unemployed into the streets. And 9 West, there's another one. I think they still make products, but they don't have their chain of shops. Brookstone, right? If you're looking for some kind of gadget gift for the holiday season, forget it. Brookstone is no longer in your mall because it has gone bankrupt. Let's just point to one other important factor here. This is actually quite interesting. It's a description. Since we talked about Indiana, we want to fulfill our promise to talk more about Indiana. So this is in Market Watch, and if I can get this cursor to move, well, maybe I can't. But here's the way it goes. Here on Market Watch, over the summer, Indiana's economy showed clear signs of weakening. And the same story has played out across the Midwest between industrial stagnation and decline and agricultural crisis because of the Chinese tariff retaliation. In Iowa, exports to China down at 95%. Back in a minute. Crisis Radio. Now, continuing this interesting analysis of the actual essence of the U.S. economic predicament. So here we are on Market Watch, the article by Michael J. Hicks from October 17th. The Midwest economy is about to get pummeled again. Manufacturing job growth has already stalled, and the trade war will make it worse. And as we heard, over the summer, the Indiana economy showed clear signs of weakening, and the same story is playing out across the manufacturing-intensive and farming-intensive states of the Midwest. And some of them, like Iowa, again, it's the soybean crop, as well as, I guess it's the Quad Cities, right? Caterpillar and these places. So the Federal Reserve has a Midwest Economic Index, and the Midwest Economic Index has been negative for 4 months. Where's the Democratic Party telling people about the real economic situation? So beautiful season out there in October, I bet. Most of the fields of the Midwest contain crops that will be harvested at a painful loss. Prices are down, and that fact is revealed in the slowing purchases of farm machinery, right? John Deere, International Harvester, across the Midwest. Hoosiers should view the market slowdown of our two largest industries with alarm. Clearly, it's the trade war, and the worst is yet to come, because you'll have more tariffs and lagging effects. So this is now the predicament. The Rust Belt is full of households and communities who are increasingly going to be in trouble. These communities are trying to poach jobs from elsewhere. Job attraction, right? Try to get a factory to move from someplace in the U.S. to you. It's a loser, as this article correctly points out. They've been trying this since the 1960s. It doesn't work. Let me also point out, this was the argument developed by the Democratic candidate for governor of Maryland, Jim Shea, and he criticized Governor Larry Hogan, this substandard, absolutely inadequate candidate, who's the media, every time they mention him, they say, the popular. No, he's not popular. Forget that. And we still have a chance to get rid of this guy. If people turn out to vote against Trump, they can vote for Ben Jealous. Whatever the problems he has, there are fewer than Hogan. So what Shea wrote about Hogan was, Hogan's idea of economic development is to try to get Amazon to come or try to poach other companies out of other states. It's a loser. It can't work. And it won't work. As Shea said, what you got to do is build it from the bottom up and from the middle out. What does that mean? Education. It means medical services, housing, mass transit. In other words, the basic investments that a modern productive economy needs. If you have that, you will attract industries, either startups or people coming in. But don't make it all about this poaching. So this is what this guy is also writing here in his own way here, that the job attraction stuff doesn't work because they're leaving. So the politicians have let the Midwest down. If you're going to get retaliatory tariffs, by midwinter, our tariffs on major trading partners will approach those obtaining in the beginning of the Great Depression. And this is Michael J. Hicks, George and Francis Ball, economics professor at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Okay, so that's a pretty grim view. And what we're seeing, let's also connect this now to the political phenomenon, right? What we've been talking about now is the potential for a rebellion by voters against Trump's misrule and the Republicans' misrule in these places. Now, this is exactly what we find. Here are some polls assembled this week. The Democrats are surging in the Midwest. This is the Senate right now, but you can sort of take this across the board. In Wisconsin, Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin is leading her Republican opponent by 11 points. In Michigan, Senator Debbie Stabenow is leading her opponent by 16 points. In Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown is leading by 16 points. And Bob Casey in Pennsylvania is leading Barletta the Varletta by 16 points. And together with this goes that the Republican candidates for governor in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and in Wisconsin are now likely to win. And if we look at Ohio, we have this guy Cordray, right, the former policer of the finance scams, right, at the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. He is leading a narrow race, but ahead. So in all of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the Democrats are leading for governor and for senator. And it's got to do with this profound malaise, this profound dissatisfaction with what Trump and the Republicans have been doing. Remember the couple of recent figures that we have on the generic ballot? One of them is Democrats 55, Republicans 42. So that's a 13-point Democratic lead. And we got another one, I think, from Reuters here, 11% generic ballot lead on Congress for the Democrats. So remember, when they say that the Republican base is energized, that's a little bit over 20%. That will not be enough. There are a lot of independents. We've got to assume if these independents, if they stand for anything, which is, of course, a real question, aren't they going to be horrified by Trump and his hooligan antics, right, by boasting about his man, John Forte, beating up the journalist who's trying to interview him. All right. Now, Kudlow of the White House team says there's no deal with China and that there's no progress in the negotiations. No deal, no progress, says Kudlow. We also find that China has been sporting the weakest growth rate in 10 years. It's the worst growth rate of GDP since 2008. And if you watch these experts on cable TV, CNBC, Bloomberg, elsewhere, you find that they don't believe the Chinese statistics. The Chinese say it's 6.5% growth, I believe. They say, well, that's just indicative. I mean, what they're trying to say is that it's rising, moderately rising, less than before. All right. So that looks not so good because unfortunately, the arrangements give the Chinese the possibility of dragging the U.S. with them to some extent. Anyway, we have more in our economic overview, and we'll be back here in just a minute. Crisis Radio, we got to cram in some more stuff you need to know as you prepare to go and vote. And vote you must. And vote we hope you will. China looking bad. Now, American companies in trouble. These are the traditional ones. General Electric lost $500 billion in market cap. Ford Motor Company laying off up to 20% or so of their workers and not in good shape. PPG, Pittsburgh Plate Glass, of once upon a time. Their warning is what started this whole thing almost 2 weeks ago. IBM down 7% in one day. The only one that looks good at the moment, P&G, Procter & Gamble, And we said Hasbro Toys in trouble. So there is a real economic slowdown. Now, in terms of the worries across the markets, right? Brexit. Theresa May now says she's going to have to he's going to force the British to stay in the single market. This is what she's saying, that they have to maintain their participation in the European Union single market at all costs, and this will be for an indefinite period of time. She thinks she can get this. The question is, the lunatic reactionaries, right, the Bojo, Boris Johnson, the Farage people, looks like they're going to try to bring her down if she tries to go with that. But it means that the entire rationale of Brexit was, we can be the bankers of China. We can rip off people all around the world. We can parasitize the whole world, not just Europe. Well, that doesn't look like it's working out too well. So Brexit is the rock on which this May government is likely to founder, and let it happen, and then have either a general election and or the people's vote. That is the second referendum on this ill-advised thing. Because if you're going to stay in the single market, you're giving up your seat at the table, in the courts, in the policy-making organs, all the rest of it, the European Parliament. So why do that? Isn't that insane for a 2% casual, random majority on some odd afternoon in the summer of 2016, the era of Trump hysteria? Okay, Italy, the Italian budget. We won't get into the merits, but the fact is that the bond market spreads, the difference between an Italian government bond and a German bond is now 3.13%, making the spread 3.13. That's a big spread. And there are signs of the rivets popping in this coalition. Salvini of the League, the reactionaries, the right-wingers, he wants to expand an amnesty for tax evaders, tax cheats. Yes, tax cheats. He wants to let them off scot-free. And this is too much for Di Maio, the weak partner in this. So Salvini was campaigning up in Trento. That is to say, the Italians call it Alto Adige. In the world, it's better known as the South Tyrol. You're right on the border, right? Brixen, Brissanone. You're right on the border between the Germanic and the Latin realms. And Salvini had to get out of there fast and fly back to Rome to prevent perhaps the fall of this government. And of course, with China, we've gone through it. The stuff with Saudi and Turkey, well, we don't want anybody to be murdered, clearly, but we don't agree with the rapid canonization of one journalist. The things that he has recommended are coherent with the program of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is not a group of demons, but Morsi. Remember, the U.S. and the U.S. ambassador supported Morsi against the return of Mubarak, and this would have been a catastrophe for the country. So I think what we're seeing is the love affair of the U.S. intelligence community and the media here with the Muslim Brotherhood. I think this is more than plausible that this guy was at least a sympathizer. Otherwise, what does he represent? Just a faction of the royal family. Anyway, we have more lore about Adnan Khashoggi. But now, couple of interesting races. The chances, as we've said, the chances are 85% that the Democrats take the House. This is 538. The generic ballot, we went through it. Couple of interesting races in the upstate New York area around Ithaca and then north. Remember that old song? Far above Cayuga's waters, there's an awful smell. Some say it's Cayuga's waters. I say it's Claudia Tenney, this reactionary woman. Get rid of her, Vote for this guy, Brindisi, meaning in Italian, a toast. So let's have a toast to Congressman Brindisi. Beto O'Rourke, he is, I think, sensible. They asked Beto O'Rourke in his town hall, which Cruz was too cowardly to attend. He could have been on CNN. Didn't want to do it. Beto was asked, what do you think of Medicare for All? He said, we want to expand Medicaid in Texas, which, of course, the Republicans have refused, right? They want to go follow Ohio, follow Virginia, states that had refused initially but can still get into it. And he says, what we want to do with Medicare is make that the public option in Obamacare and let everybody who wants to join it. And that will provide price competition and a very viable alternative. So don't turn down federal money, which is available under that Obama law. Go ahead and be a part of it. Now, it is notable, I don't think we have a real job creation program from Beto, but he does have other things. He talks about sort of regional things, right? Certain Texas communities where there are job creation programs. He wants free college, at least free community college. He wants pre-K free, $76 billion, and $60 billion in the creation of the other component here, right? Community college. So pre-K free, community college free. That's a very good beginning, and if you're in Texas, you should vote for that. Tennessee, Bredesen has bounced back. Bredesen had been given up for hopelessly behind. He has now gone up 1%, I believe, on this awful Marsha Blackburn. Menendez in New Jersey had been considered to be in trouble. I don't care about his personal story. He has been found not guilty. That's enough for me right now. We're not going to let some pedantry about this overtake us. So Menendez, according to Reuters, is up 11. And we've gone through the places, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. So, got to ask yourself now, when you're voting, what are you going to vote for? You have a government that attacks the press and tries to muzzle them. You have a government that openly supports attempts to take away the right to vote in Georgia, in Texas, in North Dakota. Very partisan, targeted stuff. The secret police help the would-be dictator to pack the courts. Great. You're always talking about jailing your political enemies. Lock him up, lock her up, mainly her. You are always looking for racial and ethnic scapegoats. You are cozying up. You are flirting with you're allying yourself with foreign dictators. A couple of things that have been actually unique here. Hitler did not have concentration camps for people below about the age of 12, but now in the United States, we have concentration camps for kiddies. You're supporting the actions of violent gangs, as in Charlottesville, and you're doing brutal pension cuts, and you've wiped out the inheritance tax, right? Mussolini wiped out the inheritance tax. So go back and read up on Mussolini between October 1920 and January 12. Vote. If you can vote early, vote now. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Go to AmericanSystem.tv in the meantime and become a part of that. And we'll see you.